In this video, I'm going to answer this question, and this question asks us to download monthly historical stock prices for Microsoft Corporation and ExxonMobil Corporation from January 2010 to May 2018 from Yahoo Finance, and using historical simple returns, calculate average return, standard deviation, and Sharpe ratio of equally weighted portfolio consisting of these two stocks. Further, it assumes that the risk-free rate is 0.001667, and it also asks us to compare the portfolio mean and the portfolio standard deviation with individual stocks' average return and standard deviation. So in order to solve this question, we need to download the historical stock price for these two companies. Since I have another video completely dedicated to how to download historical stock prices for any company from Yahoo Finance, I'm not going to do this here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use an Excel file which already has historical stock price for Microsoft and ExxonMobil from January 2010 to May 2018 combined in the Excel file. So I have here an Excel file, and that has historical stock price for ExxonMobil and Microsoft. And as we know that this question is asking us to compute portfolio standard deviation, portfolio mean, and Sharpe ratio. So before we have to answer this question, we need to compute simple return series, because we are going to use simple return series to compute portfolio mean and the standard deviation. So first, let's compute simple returns. As we all know how to compute simple return, right? So I'm going to compute simple return for ExxonMobil. So equals to, so the current price of ExxonMobil minus the previous price, right, over the previous price. So that gives me the simple return. And once you compute for the second month, you can double click on the square box and it computes for all the remaining months, right? So similarly, I can compute simple return for Microsoft, so which is equals to here the current price minus the previous month price over the previous month price, and then I can double click on the square box, and now I have the historical return series. So once I compute this, now I can move further. So we are being asked to compute portfolio mean and the portfolio standard deviation as well as Sharpe ratio. But before we get there, we need to compute individual stocks average return, variance, as well as the covariance, because we need these three in order to compute portfolio mean and the portfolio standard deviation. So let's compute average return first. So let's compute the average return for XOM equals to, I'm going to use Excel's average function. So here is a average, right? And you can select the entire series, return series for ExxonMobil, and which is 0.59%. You can drag now to the right and it gives the average return per Microsoft. Similarly, you can compute the variance. So there is a function called VAR, and choose the sample one, which is var.as, and select the entire return series for ExxonMobil in order to compute the variance of XOM stocks. Similarly, you can grab the little square box and drag to the right, and it gives us the variance of Microsoft stocks. Then we need to compute the covariance. So Excel has a function so called covariance.as. We're going to use that function to compute the covariance. So remember how to use that, covariance.as, and you have to select series, which is the return series of XOM, right, and comma the return series of Microsoft. So once you make that two selections, you can close the parenthesis and enter, and that gives us the covariance. So we computed individual stocks average return, variance, and covariance, right? Now we can move forward to compute portfolio mean, portfolio standard deviation, and Sharpe ratio. But before we get there, we need the portfolio weights, right? How much money is being spent on each stock, meaning how much money is being invested on each stock. So the question is asking us to assume 50% money is being invested on each stock. So I'm going to assume here 50% on XOM and 50% on MSFT, Microsoft. So now I can compute average portfolio return. Remember the formula here to compute average portfolio return. So the average portfolio return based on the formula is simply equals to the amount, the proportion of money you invest on stock A times the average return of stock A plus proportion of money you invest in stock B times the average of stock B, right? So I'm going to do here equals to proportion of money spent on XOM times average of XOM plus proportion of money being invested on MSFT times the average of MSFT. So that gives us the average portfolio return. If you want to change the format, you can right click and select format cell and then choose the 2 decimal place and percentage. Alright, so that is 1.13. That is the average portfolio return. You can show the formula like using formula text. So it's a formula text right here. Alright, so next we can compute the portfolio variance because we need to compute the portfolio standard deviation, and remember portfolio standard deviation is the square root of portfolio variance. So let's compute first portfolio variance. In order to compute portfolio variance, I am going to use this formula here. Portfolio variance equals to, look at here, the square of the proportion of money invested on stock A times the variance of A plus square of the proportion of money invested in stock B times the variance of B plus 2 times the proportion of money you invested on stock A times the proportion of money invested on stock B times the covariance of A and B. So we have all this information here. So I'm going to use this formula and compute portfolio variance equals to, so proportion of money spent on XOM, its square, times the variance of XOM stocks plus proportion of money spent invested on MSFT, its square, right, times the variance of MSFT, right, plus 2 times the proportion of money invested on XOM time proportion of money being invested on MSFT times the covariance of these two stocks, right? So it's the covariance which we have already computed. So if you include all of these, you can simply hit enter and that gives us the portfolio variance, and I can show you the formula. So once you compute the portfolio variance, you can easily compute portfolio standard deviation, which is the square root, and Excel has a function called SQRT, square root of the portfolio variance, and that gives us the portfolio standard deviation, which is 0.044. Alright, now we need to compute the Sharpe ratio, and I have a formula here for your convenience. And remember Sharpe ratio formula, average return of portfolio minus risk-free rate over standard deviation of portfolio, and we have all inputs given. Risk-free is given in the problem, so I'm going to use that risk-free rate and compute the Sharpe ratio. Therefore equals to, in a bracket, so portfolio average return minus the risk-free rate, right, over the standard deviation of the portfolio. So that gives us the Sharpe ratio, and I can show you the formula here, and that's how you can compute the Sharpe ratio. So once you compute Sharpe ratio, portfolio standard deviation, and average of the portfolio, the last part of the question is asking to compare the portfolio mean and the standard deviation with individual stocks average return and standard deviation. So that I'm going to leave to you. See here, for example, the average return of the portfolio is 1.13, right? Whereas the average return of the individual stock is 0.59% and 1.67%. So the portfolio mean is somewhere in between the individual stock return. Similarly, you can calculate individual stocks standard deviation and see where the portfolio standard deviation lies. All right, thank you.